It began on a quiet morning in Los Angeles, when Sandra Bullock sat in her kitchen with a cup of black coffee and an unopened letter resting beside it. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, neat, gentle, and thoughtful. It was Keanu Reeves. She hadn't seen him in months, not since the charity gala where they'd exchanged a look that felt like unfinished conversation. But now, that letter sat between her trembling hands, holding something she wasn't ready to face. Memories that refused to stay buried. She stared out the window, the sunlight sliding slowly across her marble counter, painting soft gold lines on her skin. In that stillness, her mind wandered back to the first time they met, decades ago, on the set of Speed. She could still remember his calm voice, his quiet laughter, and the way he listened when everyone else was too busy talking. There had always been something different about him. Not just kindness, but a rare type of stillness that made people feel safe. As she finally unfolded the letter, her breath caught at the first line. "Dear Sandra, I've been thinking about that day you laughed on set, the one everyone still talks about. I never told you what it meant to me." Her eyes softened. She could almost hear his voice saying it, that low, steady tone filled with honesty. She read on, slowly, each word feeling heavier than the last. Sometimes people walk into your life, at the right moment, not to change everything, but to remind you who you really are. I think you did that for me. Her chest tightened. She looked away, blinking fast. It wasn't love she was afraid of, it was what came after. They'd both seen how Hollywood treated sincerity, how whispers turned into stories, how truth became rumor. Still, in that moment, she smiled. Not a forced one for cameras, but the kind that escaped before she could stop it. And that's when her phone rang. The name on the screen made her freeze. Keanu. She hesitated before answering, her voice softer than usual. "Hey!" There was a pause on the other side. His voice came through, quiet but warm. "I wasn't sure if you'd read it yet." "I did," she said. "And now you're calling?" He laughed gently. "Maybe I wanted to hear if you smiled." She didn't reply, but the silence told him everything. There was something between them, something that had waited too long to be spoken. He asked, "Are you free tonight? There's something I want to show you." She hesitated again, unsure if she should say yes. But before she could decide, he added softly, "It's not about work, not about the past, just something personal." The way he said it felt different, real, unguarded. So she agreed. Later that evening, she found herself standing outside a small art gallery in downtown Los Angeles. There was no red carpet, no crowd, no photographers, just quiet music and warm light spilling from the windows. She stepped inside and froze when she saw him. Keanu was standing near a canvas, dressed simply in a black jacket and jeans, his hair a little messy, his expression unreadable. When he noticed her, his face lit up. That same shy, genuine smile she remembered from years ago. "You came," he said softly. "You didn't tell me it was an exhibit," she replied, trying to sound casual. "It isn't," he said. "Just something I've been working on privately." She turned toward the paintings, scenes of people sitting alone, city lights reflecting off rainy streets, hands reaching but never touching. And in one painting, she saw something that made her heart stop. It was her. Not exactly her, but unmistakably inspired by her. A woman looking out a window with sunlight on her face, holding a letter. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You painted this?" He nodded. "It reminded me of that day. The day we finished Speed. You were standing by the trailer reading a letter from your mom. You didn't know I saw you. You looked peaceful, but there was something behind your smile, like you were carrying the world quietly." She swallowed hard. "You remember that?" He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Some things you don't forget." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, she said, "Why now, Keanu? After all these years?" He sighed. "Because every time we met again, on sets, at events, interviews, I felt like we were pretending that we didn't notice something real. I didn't want to keep pretending." She looked away, her eyes glistening. "We both had our lives," she whispered. "Different paths." "Maybe," he said gently, "but paths cross for a reason." Her heart pounded. There was truth in his words, and yet fear too. They stood there, surrounded by art and silence, two people who had lived entire lives apart, but somehow never fully let go of each other. And then, a reporter's voice broke through the quiet. "Keanu? Sandra!" They turned sharply. A photographer had slipped in through the door, camera flashing. Sandra's instinct kicked in. She turned away, shielding her face. Keanu stepped in front of her without hesitation, his hand raised to block the flash. The security quickly ushered the man out, but the damage was done. Sandra's pulse raced. "This will be everywhere tomorrow," she whispered. He looked at her calmly. "Let them say what they want. We know the truth." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel comforted or terrified. Outside, the sound of rain began to fall, soft. At first, then heavier, echoing through the streets like quiet applause. They stood by the window, watching it pour. Keanu spoke first. "You ever wonder what might have happened if we hadn't been afraid back then?" Her answer came slowly. "Every day." The honesty of it surprised them both. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was no script now, no camera, just two hearts quietly remembering what they'd never said aloud. He smiled faintly. "You just smiled again," he said. She didn't deny it. "Maybe I couldn't help it." The rain outside blurred the city lights, and for a long moment neither moved. But deep down, both knew. The past they'd buried was rising again, and this time it wasn't going to fade easily. As they left the gallery, the air between them was charged, fragile, electric. Sandra glanced at him before stepping into her car. "Good night, Keanu," she said softly. He nodded. "Good night, Sandra." But when he turned away, something inside her shifted. She looked at his reflection in the window, standing still in the rain, and for the first time in years, she realized that some stories never really end. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. That night, as she lay in bed, the rain still whispering outside, her phone buzzed once, a message from Keanu. "There's one more thing I didn't tell you. Tomorrow, you'll understand." Her eyes widened, her heart thudding in the dark. She typed back, "What do you mean?" But the screen stayed silent, and in that silence, Sandra Bullock smiled again. Not because she understood, but because for the first time in a long time, she wanted to. The hidden message behind Keanu's words. The morning light filtered softly through Sandra Bullock's curtains, spilling across her white sheets as she blinked awake. The memory of Keanu's text still echoing in her mind. "There's one more thing I didn't tell you. Tomorrow, you'll understand." She reread it 3 times, but it made no more sense than it had the night before. She sat up slowly, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, and looked at her phone again. No new messages, no missed calls, just that one cryptic text that refused to leave her thoughts. She wanted to believe it was something simple, maybe another painting, maybe a story, maybe just Keanu being Keanu, mysterious, kind, and quietly unpredictable. But something about the tone in his message felt heavier, more deliberate. After breakfast, she opened her calendar. Nothing planned, no interviews, no rehearsals. Still, she couldn't sit still. Every sound outside, a car door closing, a knock from the neighbor's apartment, made her glance toward the door. And then, around noon, her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "Miss Bullock, This is from Keanu. Please come to the address below at 3 p.m. Her heart skipped. She checked the address. It was in West Hollywood, near a quiet street she remembered from years ago. Curiosity and concern mixed in her chest as she grabbed her jacket and keys. The drive there felt longer than usual. Her thoughts replayed their last conversation. His steady voice, his calm eyes, the way he had said, "Maybe it's time to stop pretending." She wondered what he meant. When she arrived, the address led her to a small studio. Old brick walls, ivy creeping up the side, and a wooden door that looked like it had been there for decades. She hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, it was quiet. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, falling over canvases leaned against the walls. She stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. "Keanu?" she called out. No response. She walked further in, until her eyes caught something on the far wall. It was a new painting, still unfinished, but what struck her most was what it showed. Two figures standing under the rain, one holding an umbrella over the other. Even though the faces were blurred, she knew who they were. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Keanu. "Look at the table near the window." She turned, startled. On the table lay an envelope with her name on it, and next to it an old camera, a Polaroid model she hadn't seen in years. She picked up the envelope, opened it carefully, and unfolded the letter inside. "Sandra, if you're reading this, I'm probably on my way to somewhere far, not running away, just chasing something that's been waiting for me. A project, a promise, and maybe a truth. You once told me art only matters if it's honest. I'm trying to be honest now." Her breath trembled. She sank into the chair, continuing to read. "Do you remember the orphanage we visited years ago? The one outside San Diego? I've been funding it quietly since then. The kids are older now, and one of them, Maya, wrote a play about second chances. They're performing it today. She asked me to bring you." She looked up from the letter, eyes widening. "If you come, you'll understand everything." A small note at the bottom added, "Follow the address written on the back." She flipped the paper. There it was. A handwritten address of a small community theater 2 hours away. Without hesitation, she got up and left. The drive felt like a storm inside her. Excitement, confusion, and something else she didn't want to name yet. When she finally reached the theater, the parking lot was nearly empty. She could hear faint laughter and music coming from inside. The moment she stepped through the doors, a young girl in her late teens spotted her. "You're Sandra Bullock," she exclaimed with wide eyes. Sandra smiled softly. "And you must be Maya." The girl nodded eagerly. "Keanu told me you'd come. He said you'd want to see what love looks like when people don't say it but still mean it." Those words hit her like a whisper from the past. She followed Maya backstage. Keanu wasn't there. Instead, a small table held several photos, pictures of the children, a few sketches, and one photograph that froze her heart. It was from the day at the orphanage years ago, Keanu and Sandra sitting under a tree, surrounded by laughing kids. He was holding a broken toy car, and she was laughing uncontrollably at something he said. It was genuine joy, the kind that cameras rarely captured. Beneath the photo, a note in Keanu's handwriting read, "Sometimes, the best stories are the ones we forget to tell." Before she could process it, the lights dimmed. The play was about to begin. She took a seat quietly in the second row. The play started with a young girl narrating the story of two people who met by accident, drifted apart, and then found their way back through kindness. The script was simple but pure, filled with the same emotion Sandra felt in her chest right now. Halfway through, she noticed something familiar in the dialogue. One of the characters said, "You smiled that day and I knew it was real." Her hands tightened around her seat. That was her line. She had said it to Keanu during one of their film interviews years ago, off camera, when he had made her laugh during a serious moment. Tears welled up in her eyes. She looked toward the back of the theater. And there he was. Keanu stood in the shadows, watching quietly, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, He smiled faintly, like he already knew what she was feeling. After the performance ended, the children ran up to him, hugging him tightly. He laughed, ruffled their hair, and then walked toward her. "You came," he said softly. "You didn't give me much choice," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. He smiled again, but there was something tired in his eyes. "Maya wrote that line. She said it reminded her of you, of me." He nodded. "She's seen our movies. Said she could tell we were both acting like we didn't care, even when we did." Sandra didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "She's observant," she said quietly. He looked at her, then down at his hands. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "And I wasn't sure if I should. But after today, I can't keep it anymore." Before she could respond, one of the children called out, "Mr. Reeves, come see the stage lights." He smiled gently, nodding toward them. "Give me a second," he said to her, then walked toward the group. Sandra watched him go, the same calm, kind figure she'd always known. But there was something different about his steps, something heavy, as if he was walking toward a truth he didn't want to face. Minutes passed. The kids cheered as he fixed a loose wire. Then suddenly the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out completely. The crowd gasped. Sandra stood up instantly, her heart pounding. "Keanu!" she called out. No answer. She pushed past a few people and reached the stage, her voice trembling. "Keanu!" Someone turned on a flashlight. He was standing near the side curtain, holding the wire, safe but silent, his face pale. "You okay?" she asked, rushing closer. He nodded weakly. "Yeah, just a little dizzy. Guess I stood up too fast." She frowned, worried. "You should sit down." He gave a faint smile. "I'm fine. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't disappear again." The tone in his voice made her chest tighten. It wasn't playful this time, and it was raw, real, and vulnerable. She nodded slowly. "I won't," she whispered. But as the lights came back on, the color didn't return to his face. He looked at her one last time before turning away. His shoulders slightly slumped, as if he was hiding something deeper than exhaustion. That night, after the performance ended, he vanished again. No one saw where he went. Not the kids, not the crew, not even Maya. And when Sandra checked her phone hours later, she found a single new message from him. "Thank you for coming today. You smiled, and that's all I needed to see." Her hands shook as she read it, because somewhere deep down she felt it. This wasn't just about a play or a letter. Keanu was saying goodbye to something, but to what, or whom, she didn't yet know. The secret Keanu tried to hide the next morning, Sandra woke up to an uneasy quiet. Her phone lay beside her pillow, the screen still showing Keanu's last message. "You smiled. That's all I needed to see." Something about the way he wrote it felt final, like a curtain closing. She stared at it for a long time, trying to convince herself it was just his way of expressing gratitude. But her gut told her otherwise. She got up, poured herself some coffee, and opened the window blinds. Sunlight poured in, but it didn't feel warm. It felt distant. Her thoughts were heavy, tangled with questions she couldn't answer. Why had he disappeared after the play? Where did he go? And what was he hiding behind those quiet smiles? As she sat at her kitchen table, her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, a young man in a black jacket stood there, holding a small envelope. "Miss Bullock?" he asked politely. "Yes. This is from Mr. Reeves. He asked me to deliver it today." Her breath caught. "Where is he?" The man hesitated. He didn't say. "Just told me you'd understand when you read this." She took the envelope and nodded slowly. "Thank you." He gave a faint smile and walked away, leaving her in the doorway. Back inside, she sat down and tore it open. Inside was a short letter, written in the same careful handwriting she'd come to know. "Dear Sandra, I know you must be wondering what's going on. There's something I need to face alone before I can see you again. It's not about us, not about the past. It's about keeping a promise I made years ago." She frowned, reading further. "When we visited the orphanage, one of the children, Liam, needed surgery. I told him I'd help him one day if he ever needed me again. He reached out last month. He's grown now, but he's in trouble. I couldn't ignore it. Her eyes widened. Don't worry about me. Just know this isn't goodbye. It's something I have to do quietly. Beneath that line, one more sentence. If I don't return in time, look for the truth at the place where art began. The words, where art began, echoed in her mind. She remembered their first collaboration, the film set of Speed, but she also remembered something else. The small art studio in downtown Los Angeles, where Keanu had first shown her his paintings. That was where everything between them had silently started to change. Without wasting a minute, she grabbed her car keys and left. The city was bright and alive, but her world felt narrowed down to one mission: finding him. When she reached the studio, the door was slightly open. She pushed it gently and stepped inside. Everything was quiet, except for the soft hum of a ceiling fan. The walls were covered with unfinished paintings, most of them new. Her breath caught when she saw one right in front of her. It was a portrait of Keanu, sitting under a tree, surrounded by children. He was smiling faintly, holding something in his hand, a folded letter. And in the corner of the canvas, painted in soft gray, were the words, "For Sandra, when she finally sees." Her chest tightened. She reached for her phone, dialing his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Keanu, it's me," she said softly. "Whatever this is, please call me back. I'm worried." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. She ended the call and noticed something on the table near the window, a small notebook with his initials. She opened it carefully. The first few pages were sketches and notes, quotes about art, love, and silence. But then halfway through, she found an entry dated just 2 weeks ago. "Sometimes the heart speaks before the mouth can find the words." I told her the truth once in silence, and she smiled. Maybe that was enough. Her hands trembled. What truth had he meant? The next page had an address, a location in Northern California, circled in ink, without thinking twice. She packed a small bag and left again. The drive north was long, through winding highways and quiet hills. Her thoughts moved faster than the car. She remembered their conversations, his gentle humor, his reflective silences. He was the kind of man who never spoke without meaning it, the kind who carried his emotions quietly, as if afraid to burden others. After 6 hours, she arrived at the address, a small cabin surrounded by pine trees overlooking a lake. Smoke curled from the chimney. Her heart raced as she stepped out of the car. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again, louder. This time the door opened slowly. A woman in her 50s stood there, her eyes kind but weary. "You must be Sandra," she said. "Yes," Sandra replied carefully. "I'm looking for Keanu." The woman's expression softened. "He was here. Left early this morning. Said he needed to visit someone before heading to the hospital." "Hospital?" Sandra repeated, her voice trembling. The woman hesitated, realizing she had said too much. "He didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" The woman sighed. "He hasn't been well for some time. He didn't want anyone to know, especially not you." "Said he didn't want pity?" Sandra froze. The words hit her like a sudden wave. "Not well? What do you mean?" "He's been dealing with something serious. But he said he'd face it alone. He left a message for you." The woman handed her a sealed envelope, smaller than the last one. Sandra's fingers shook as she opened it. "I didn't want you to see me like this. Not because of pride, but because every time you smiled, it made me forget the pain. I wanted that to be how you remembered me. Not weak, not fading, just me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She pressed the paper against her heart. The letter continued. "If I make it through this, I'll call you from the same number. If I don't, remember the promise we made, to never let kindness end in silence." She closed her eyes, the words burning into her. "Where did he go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman replied softly, "St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco." Sandra thanked her and rushed back to her car, the world outside blurring into streaks of gray and green. It was evening by the time she reached the hospital. She ran through the glass doors, her breath heavy, her chest pounding. "Keanu Reeves," she said urgently at the reception. "Which room?" The nurse checked the list, then looked up. "He's in room 214. She hurried down the hall, every step echoing like a heartbeat. When she reached the door, she stopped, trying to catch her breath. Through the small window, she saw him, sitting upright on the bed, pale but smiling faintly at the nurse beside him. She opened the door slowly. He turned, surprise flickering in his eyes, followed by that quiet warmth she had missed. "You found me," he said softly. "You didn't make it hard," she replied, forcing a small smile through her tears. "You left a trail of heartbreak and paint everywhere," he chuckled weakly. "I guess I did." She stepped closer, taking his hand gently. "You should have told me. I didn't want you to worry," he whispered. "It's just some treatments, some tests. Nothing dramatic." "Don't do that," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't pretend you're fine when you're not." He looked down at their hands, his fingers warm against hers. "You always saw through me," he said quietly, "even when I tried to hide." The room was silent except for the soft beeping of the monitor. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night sky. "So this was the promise?" she asked. "Helping Liam while you were going through this?" He nodded slowly. He needed help. "I couldn't say no. I didn't want the kids to see weakness. They needed to see hope." Sandra felt her throat tighten. "And who gives you hope, Keanu?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You," he said simply. For a moment, she forgot the hospital walls, the machines, the fear. Everything faded into stillness, just two people, sitting in a room, remembering what really mattered. And then the heart monitor beeped faster. The nurse rushed in, checking his pulse, adjusting the wires. "It's fine," Keanu said quickly, smiling weakly. "Just a little dizzy again." But the nurse's eyes told a different story. Sandra stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. She reached for his hand again, squeezing tightly. "Don't you dare leave me with another unfinished story," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his eyes heavy. "This one's not unfinished," he said softly. "It's just beginning." And as the machines hummed around them, she felt his grip tighten, then weaken, as his eyes fluttered closed. The room filled with urgent voices, doctors rushing in. But all Sandra could hear was the sound of her heartbeat echoing his name. The message he left behind, the night inside St. Mary's Hospital, felt endless. Sandra sat by the window of the waiting room, her eyes red and tired, her hands clasped tightly as she waited for news. The doctors had rushed Keanu away the moment his pulse dropped. The last image she had of him was his faint smile, the way his fingers had slipped slowly from her grasp. Outside, the city lights blurred against the dark glass. Rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the window. It reminded her of that night in Los Angeles. The gallery, the rain, the painting, the way he had said, "You ever wonder what might have happened if we hadn't been afraid back then?" She had smiled that night. She remembered it now, painfully. The door opened. A doctor stepped in quietly, removing his glasses. "Miss Bullock," he said gently. "He's stable for now. The episode was severe, but he's responding to treatment. We'll have to keep him under observation for a few days." Sandra exhaled slowly, her chest loosening just enough for her to breathe again. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. "He's asleep. Just for a few minutes." She walked down the hallway, her steps soft, her heart heavy. When she entered the room, everything looked peaceful. The soft rhythm of the machines, the low light from the bedside lamp. Keanu lay there, pale but calm, his breathing steady. She sat beside him and took his hand gently. "You scared me," she whispered. "You always do things your way." Her eyes lingered on the small details, the book on the table, his phone, and a folded paper placed neatly beside it. She reached for it slowly. Her name was written on it, Sandra. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. "If you're reading this, it means I probably couldn't explain everything in person. I don't want you to worry. I've been living with this condition for a while now. It's not just about the body, Mo. It's about the weight of everything we never say. I've carried too much silence." Her eyes blurred as she kept reading. "You once told me that silence can heal or destroy, depending on what we fill it with. I chose to fill mine with gratitude. For you, for the moments we shared, For the way you made me laugh when I didn't know I could." Her tears fell quietly, soaking the edges of the letter. "There's something I left for you. A key. It's inside my sketchbook, the one from the studio. It opens a place that holds our story. Go there when you're ready." Beneath the words, there was a small drawing of a lock and an arrow pointing to the corner of the page. She looked closer and noticed a faint impression where something small had once been attached. Probably a key. Her mind raced. She remembered the sketchbook, the one she had seen in his studio, lying near the window. She hadn't noticed a key then. Maybe it had fallen out. She looked at him again. He was still asleep, his expression soft, as if he were dreaming. "You never make things simple," she said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Even now you leave me puzzles." That night she stayed by his side until morning. The nurses came and went. She barely slept. When dawn arrived, the golden light crept across his bed and she finally stood up. She pressed a soft kiss to his hand. "I'll find it," she whispered. "Whatever you left for me, I'll find it." Later that afternoon, she returned to his studio in downtown Los Angeles. The air smelled faintly of paint and wood, and sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds. It looked exactly as she had left it, except now, every corner felt charged with memory. She found the sketchbook where she remembered, on the table near the window. She turned the pages slowly, looking for any hidden compartment or folded paper. Then she saw it. The back cover had a small tear. She lifted it gently, and there it was. A tiny golden key taped inside. Her breath caught. Attached to it was a small note, barely one sentence long. "For the place where truth lives." She looked around, confused. What place? The only truth she could think of was the art, the way he painted what he couldn't say aloud. And then it clicked. There was another studio, a private one, the one he had mentioned years ago in interviews. It was outside the city near Malibu by the cliffs. He had once told her, "That's where I go when I don't want to be Keanu Reeves anymore." She knew where to go. The drive took over an hour. The closer she got to the ocean, the quieter everything became. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and violet. When she finally reached the cliffside, she saw a small wooden house, weathered by time, surrounded by tall grass and the endless sound of waves. She walked up the path, her heart pounding. The front door had an old lock. She slid the golden key into it. It fit perfectly. The door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled of salt and turpentine. The walls were covered with canvases, dozens of them. She stepped closer and realized each one told a story. Their story. There was a painting of the speed set, another of the bus explosion, another of the two of them laughing behind the scenes. There were portraits, too. Her reading a script. Him fixing a prop, both of them standing under fake rain, pretending it was just another take. But one painting made her stop. It was new, unfinished, but the emotion was unmistakable. It showed her sitting in a hospital room beside him, her hand on his. She felt a chill. This was now, this very week. She turned around, her chest tight. On a small table near the back, a voice recorder blinked with a red light. She pressed play. His voice filled the room. "Hey, Sandra, if you're hearing this, then I guess you found it. I wanted you to see this place and the part of my life I never shared. These paintings aren't for the world. They're for truth, for what was real." His voice was calm, warm, steady. "I've spent so many years acting, playing heroes, pretending to be strong. But the moments that meant the most were the quiet ones. When you smiled between takes. When we helped those kids at the orphanage. When we stood in silence and it said everything." She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping down. "I didn't paint these to hold on to you," he continued. "I painted them so you'd know how much you mattered. Not as a co-star, not as an icon, just as Sandra. The person who reminded me what kindness looks like when it doesn't need an audience." His voice paused, softer now. "There's one more painting behind the curtain. I never finished it." "Maybe you can." She turned slowly. In the corner of the room, a white sheet covered something large. She walked over and lifted it. Underneath was a blank canvas with faint outlines. A man and woman standing together at the edge of a cliff, looking toward the horizon. A note was pinned beside it. This is us, not as actors, but as people who never stopped believing in good. Her tears fell freely now. She looked at the canvas for a long time before sitting down, picking up a brush and touching the first stroke of color to the surface. The waves crashed outside, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat for hours. She painted soft blues for the ocean, warm light for the sky, and gold across the horizon. She painted the figures, too, one with his calm gaze, the other with her quiet smile. When she finished, the sun had begun to set. She stepped back and stared at the image. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She whispered, "You were right, Keanu. Some stories don't end. They just change form." She turned to leave, and that's when her phone buzzed. A new message. It was from his number. "You found it." Her heart skipped. She typed quickly, "Keanu? Where are you?" A few seconds passed. "Still here." "Look up." She froze, her pulse racing. She turned toward the window overlooking the cliff. Through the fading orange light, she saw a familiar figure standing outside, leaning weakly on the railing, his jacket blowing in the sea wind. "Keanu?" she whispered, running toward the door. She burst outside, her breath catching in the salty air. He turned, his face pale but smiling. That same quiet smile that had always broken through her walls. "You really did find it," he said softly. She shook her head in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here." "The doctor said—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I couldn't stay there. Not when you were out here finishing what I started." She stepped closer, tears in her eyes. "You could have told me, and missed seeing your smile again," he said, his voice trembling but full of warmth. The sun dipped lower, bathing them both in golden light. The wind carried the sound of waves and the unspoken truth between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. "This," he said, placing it in her hand, "is the real reason I brought you here." She opened it slowly. Inside, in his careful handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Our story isn't over yet." She looked up at him, tears streaming, unable to speak. He smiled, his voice barely above a whisper, "So let's not hide anymore." And as the last light of sunset wrapped around them, Sandra Bullock finally stopped holding back and smiled, the same smile she had hidden for years. The wish he couldn't say aloud. The ocean breeze brushed softly against Sandra's face as she stood there on the cliff, staring at Keanu. His figure looked fragile under the dimming sky, the sunset wrapping him in gold and shadow. The wind carried the scent of salt and paint, mixing the calm of the sea with the ache in her heart. She stepped closer, still holding the small paper in her hand. "Our story isn't over yet." "Keanu," she said gently, her voice trembling, "you should be resting. The doctors said you need—" He smiled faintly. "I know what they said, but I needed to see this place again before I can rest. Before I can do what I have to do." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to face the horizon, his gaze lost in the endless blue. "You ever notice," he began softly, "how time feels slower when you're finally honest with yourself?" "Keanu," she said again, stepping closer, "don't do that. Don't speak like you're saying goodbye." He looked at her then, really looked, with eyes that carried both peace and pain. "I'm not saying goodbye," he whispered. "I'm saying what I couldn't before." The world around them seemed to still. Even the sea felt quieter, waiting. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple but beautiful, with a tiny charm shaped like a wave. "Do you remember this?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "You kept it?" He nodded. "You gave it to me years ago after we finished filming the lake house. You said it was just a small token, but I never took it off. Not once. It reminded me that not every story needs to be loud to be real." She looked down, blinking fast. "You were always better at remembering the quiet things." He smiled. "Maybe because those were the moments that mattered." He handed her the bracelet. "I want you to have it back." She shook her head. "No, Keanu. It's yours, please, he said softly. I want it to be yours again. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want to know it's with you, where it began. Her hands trembled as she took it. Don't talk like that, she whispered. He smiled gently. Then let me talk about something else. Something I've wanted to say since that first day we met. She waited, heart pounding. You made me believe in kindness again, he said slowly. Back then I was lost. I was working, smiling, living, but not feeling. And then you walked in. And it wasn't just about acting anymore. It was about connection. You reminded me that good people still exist, that love can be quiet, patient, and pure. Her breath caught. Keanu, he stepped closer, his voice low. I spent so many years trying to keep it professional, to protect what we had. I didn't want Hollywood to turn it into gossip. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid for my reputation and started being afraid of losing you. She felt tears spill down her cheeks, her chest tightening as she listened. So when I found out about my condition, he continued, I told myself I'd face it alone. I didn't want it to change how you looked at me, but I was wrong. Hiding it didn't protect anyone. It just made me realize how much time I'd wasted not telling you the truth. His words broke something inside her. She reached out, placing her hand on his cheek. You don't need to protect me from your truth, she said softly. You never did. He closed his eyes, leaning slightly into her touch. It's strange, he murmured, how the world sees us as strong because we act. But the real strength is this, letting someone see you when you're not okay. She swallowed hard. Then let me see you. All of you. The pain, the fear, everything. Just don't shut me out again. He opened his eyes and smiled. That same quiet, gentle smile that had followed her through decades. Okay, he whispered. They stood there for a long moment, the sea roaring below, the sky darkening above. The horizon seemed endless, just like the silence that followed. Not heavy, but full. After a while, he took a deep breath. There's one last thing I want to do, he said. What is it? A promise. For the kids. For Maya, Liam, all of them. I started a fund for art, for hope. It's called the Second Chance Project. I want you to help me run it. It's in both our names. She looked at him, stunned. You did all that while hiding, he said quietly. Yeah, I wanted to leave something behind that wasn't about me. Something that would last longer than a name on a screen. She felt her throat tighten again. You're not leaving, she said, her voice cracking. You're going to get better, and we'll do it together. He smiled softly, looking up at the sky that was now painted with stars. Maybe, he said. Maybe not. But together, that's what matters. The wind picked up, cool and strong, wrapping around them like a memory. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the peace in his face, the acceptance. Then he did something he had never done before. He took her hand, lifted it slowly, and pressed it against his heart. Do you feel that? He asked. She nodded, unable to speak. That's what you gave me, he whispered. Every time you smiled, every time you looked at me like I wasn't acting, you made me feel alive. A tear slipped down her face. And what did you give me, Keanu? She whispered back. He smiled faintly. A reason to keep believing that love, real love, doesn't need an ending. They stood there in silence, the sound of the ocean crashing below. After a long moment, he said softly, If tomorrow never comes for me, promise me one thing. She swallowed hard. Anything. Don't let the world forget kindness. Make that the story we leave behind. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I promise. He looked at her one last time, eyes shining in the faint light. Thank you, he whispered. For every smile you never hid. And then, as the night wrapped around them, his body swayed slightly. She caught him before he fell, holding him tightly, her heart pounding in terror. Keanu, she cried out, her voice breaking against the roar of the wind. He opened his eyes weakly, his hand finding hers again. Don't cry, he whispered. It's not the end. It's just another scene. His eyes closed slowly, his breathing shallow. the sea's rhythm echoing the sound of her heartbeat, and as she held him under the stars, she whispered through her tears, "Then I'll wait for the next one." The waves crashed below, steady and eternal, as the screen of the night faded to black. The legacy of the quiet smile, the world outside the hospital moved too fast for Sandra to notice. Days blurred into one another, each sunrise bringing another round of prayers, messages, and headlines that all said the same thing. Keanu Reeves in critical care. For everyone else, it was news. For her, it was the sound of a heart breaking in slow motion. She sat by his bedside, his hand still in hers, the machines humming in their endless rhythm. The doctors spoke softly, their words careful but heavy, the kind of words meant to prepare, not comfort. She didn't want to hear them. She just wanted him to wake up again and say something simple, something only he would say. The bracelet he had given her, the one shaped like a wave, rested around her wrist. She hadn't taken it off since that night on the cliff. Sometimes she caught herself touching it when the silence grew too loud, as if it could connect her to him somehow. On the 5th day, the doctors said he had stabilized. For a moment, hope flickered in her chest again. She looked at him and whispered, "You're still fighting, aren't you?" His eyes stayed closed, but his fingers twitched slightly, and that was enough. She stayed like that for hours, watching the light change in the room. Nurses came and went. Friends visited briefly, leaving flowers, cards, and quiet tears. But she stayed. She couldn't leave him again. Not when he had finally let her see the part of him he'd always hidden. That night, she fell asleep in the chair beside him. When she woke up, the morning sun was filtering through the curtains. The machines were still steady, but something felt different. Softer, calmer, as if the air itself had changed. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked toward him. His face was peaceful, the lines of pain gone, and for a fleeting second she thought he was simply sleeping. Then the monitor beeped once, a sound sharp enough to pierce the quiet, and fell into silence. "No," she whispered, her heart stopping. "No, please, no!" Doctors and nurses rushed in. She stood frozen as they tried everything, medication, oxygen, resuscitation. But deep down, she already knew, because as she looked at him, she saw it, that faint, familiar smile. The same one he had when he said, "Our story isn't over yet." And she realized maybe this was what he meant. The funeral was private. No cameras, no flashes, no stage. Just close friends, quiet music, and the ocean breeze whispering through the trees. Sandra stood by the sea, holding a folded letter that had arrived the day before. The handwriting was his. The envelope read simply, "For the days after." Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Dear Sandra, if you're reading this, it means I finally let go. I didn't want to leave you with sadness, only gratitude. The truth is, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not saying what mattered. So here it is." She took a deep breath and kept reading. "You gave me peace in a world that only ever asked for performance. You saw me as a person, not an idea, and because of that, I could finally see myself too. I hope you keep smiling even when it hurts. Because every time you smile, you remind people that gentleness can survive in a cruel world." Her tears fell silently. She could almost hear his voice in the words. Steady, kind, never dramatic, just real. The letter continued. "The Second Chance Project will launch next month. It's yours now. Make it what we dreamed it to be. A place where forgotten kids find light, and where art becomes healing. And one more thing, I left you a file in the studio, labeled Unfinished Scene. When you find it, don't fix it. Just watch." At the end, one final line. "I'll always be where stories begin, in the quiet between your smile and my silence." She held the paper against her chest, the sea wind carrying her tears away. A week later, she went back to his cliffside studio. The house smelled of salt, turpentine, and rain. Everything was untouched. The canvases, the brushes, the voice recorder still on the table. She found the file he mentioned, an old hard drive labeled Unfinished Scene. She plugged it into the projector he used for editing. The screen flickered to life, and there he was. Keanu sat in front of the camera, wearing the same black jacket he'd worn at the gallery. Behind him, the ocean glimmered. "Hey," he said softly, smiling that small, familiar smile. "If you're watching this, it means I ran out of time." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. I didn't want this to be sad. I wanted it to be honest. I've spent so many years telling other people's stories. But this is ours. He looked directly into the lens, his eyes gentle. "I want you to promise me something. Don't let pain make you quiet. Tell the world what kindness looks like. Tell them it's not weakness. Tell them it's strength." He reached forward, adjusting the camera slightly, and then added, "And when you do, smile. That's how I'll know you're okay." The screen faded to black. For a long time, she sat there in silence, the echo of his voice filling the room. Then she stood up, walked to the blank canvas they had started together, and added one last stroke, a thin line of golden light across the horizon. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." Months passed. The Second Chance Project opened in a small building overlooking the ocean. Children filled the rooms with laughter and color. The walls were covered with paintings, not just his, but theirs. Art made from healing, hope, and memory. Sandra stood at the entrance, greeting visitors. She wore a simple white dress and the silver bracelet he had given her. Around her wrist, the charm glimmered under the sunlight like a wave returning to the shore. A young girl, Maya, came running up to her. Holding a small painting, "Miss Sandra," she said brightly, "I finished the picture for Mr. Reeves." Sandra knelt to look. The painting showed a man sitting under a tree, smiling at a woman reading a letter beside him. Sunlight streamed between them, warm and endless. "It's beautiful," Sandra whispered. Maya grinned. "He said once that smiles never really go away. They just travel." Sandra felt her throat tighten. She hugged the girl gently. He was right. As the sun dipped low over the water, she walked outside to the edge of the cliff, the same spot where they'd last stood together. The wind carried the scent of salt and paint, just like before. She looked at the horizon and smiled. Not the kind for cameras, not the kind that hides pain, the kind that comes from peace. "You were right, Keanu," she said softly. "Our story isn't over. It just changed form." The sea shimmered as if answering her, the waves catching the last golden light of evening, and for a fleeting moment, she could almost hear him. That familiar voice carried on the wind. "Gentle, certain, and calm. Smile, Sandra. That's how I'll find you." Her lips curved, tears glistening in the sunlight. And this time, she didn't hide her smile.